Welcome, Diane.
Hi, Kimberly. It's so nice to see you. And I miss you and our times together in DC.
I miss you. You know, it's so funny. I picture myself with my mat set out. I always had my little spot in our studio by the blocks. And you were either you would assist a class or you'd be coming into the class and putting your stuff in the cubbies and would always have something nice to say. And I was always like, that girl is so nice. So I remember you vividly as like one of just the sweetest people ever. Isn't that
Well,
funny?
thank you. Well, you created such a opening and wonderful space to allow that to happen. I think that anybody who came into Tranquil Space would always walk out the door very happy and transformed. That was such a magical place. And thank you
Mhm.
for all you did to really build that great culture of yoga in DC.
Thank you. And thank you for writing this amazing book for a good cause, a practical guide to giving joyfully. So beautiful. And I'm so proud of you. And I'm so excited to talk to you about this book and, ways in which our listeners can, really touch into one of the Tranquility du Jour tenets is compassion and how to tap into that and actually do something about it, because I think we can get really paralyzed.
No, that's certainly true. That's certainly true. And it is a wonderful manifestation of a lot of the tenets that we learn in yoga. The notion of intentionality, the notion of, the being balanced inside so this way we can give outward as well. So I think it really brings together a lot of nice places where our worlds intersect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just, what I love about the book too, is it's just so cleanly laid out and it's just so clear. And so I want to start with the first part, which is the majority of the book, and it's finding your way as a nonprofit volunteer. So I'm just going to list a few things that I really was like, oh, good, let's touch on these: direct service, fundraising, social media, advocating, and volunteering. So can
Mhm.
you just define these five and maybe just a little explanation around, okay, how can we show up and do these different things? Because I know we've got the personality, like the brand, and how to know really what you're cut out for. Because sometimes we think, I want to do direct service, and then we're like, oh, this is not for me, right? I'm just going to donate. So
Yeah.
tell to us, if you will, a little about those five.
Sure, sure. So direct service is the notion of going in and working with populations that need help. So it may be going out to a park and doing a cleanup. It may be going to an animal shelter and playing with the pups. It may be interacting with children. It may be offering yoga classes to homeless women. It is the opportunity to actually reach out with our hearts and our hands to do service. So that's the actual volunteer work. Fundraising, on the other hand, is raising resources for organizations that need help. And it is one step away from doing that direct service, but it's providing those very well needed financial resources. Sometimes it's getting volunteers to serve for an organization. It's actually making sure that the organization has enough resources to get its mission done. Now, if we look at the notion, I'm just thinking about the five different things. Can you just remind me what you
Of
had pulled out from
course.
your list? Okay,
Yep.
because I'm looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. And then social media,
Mhm.
advocating, and volunteering, which it sounds like
Got it.
volunteering and direct service are somewhat
They
aligned.
are. But let me go into the volunteering part for a
Okay.
little bit, because a lot of times, too, board members are volunteers. What does that mean? They are actually giving their time, their talent, and their treasure to an organization without compensation to make sure that the organization is very well run. Social media is advocating for any organization that's near and dear to your heart, using Instagram, using TikTok, using Facebook, just to either raise awareness for an organization or even potentially to fundraise as well. And if you look at advocacy, that's actually perhaps going to Capitol Hill That may be going to your local city council. It may be, if you're in a small town like me, going to your select board and saying, hey, there's a group of people here. There's an organization that really, really needs some help. We need to pay attention to it. So it's actually using your voice and making sure that you're speaking out on behalf of those organizations that need help.
I love it. The advocating piece is so interesting over the years, and they haven't been happening much over the past couple of years with COVID, of course, but animal rights conferences in the DC area. And there's one, I think maybe even both of the big ones would always have an advocacy day, right? So the following, you've gone through trainings and learned so much from experts over 3 days, and then Monday is typically advocacy day. And, you get these little kind of printouts on the various topics, and then you go and talk to your congressperson. And of course, ours is a congresswoman who unfortunately has no really vote. But it was so exciting to like go onto Capitol Hill and have my little pamphlets and sit down, and and he was just like I did not get to speak to her, but her aide, and he was like, oh yes, we agree on this and this and this and this. And I was like, yay. And they were things like making sure that women, as they leave their abusers, that they can take their pets with them, right? So things like that, making sure that pets are allowed in shelters, so important. Oh my God. And then also like horse soaring, which is, putting like acid on the shoe, right? So that they clump beautifully, and it's just say no to that, right? So things that is like, I think we all can get behind. But that was so exciting. I'm like, I'm an advocate, so, oftentimes you are kind of trained in that if you go to a conference and they have an advocacy day. I just wanted to mention that because, it can be quite empowering to show up. And again, even if your congressperson has no vote, to feel like you're somehow making a difference.
Absolutely. And even if you feel like you don't have to know all the things about all the issues. Really, just the fact that you are showing up in your congressperson's office, leaving behind a brochure and saying, this is important to me, really makes a difference. Keep track of all of that information, who's coming into the office, talking about a particular issue for or against, and they use that to really weigh in where they're going to ultimately stand on that issue. So it's really vitally important to do that. Don't feel like you have to be an expert going in and you have to have this encyclopedia of knowledge. It's just the fact that you were there and showed up that really matters.
Oh yeah, because I was like, if they ask me questions about this, I'm not fully clueless, but I'm kind of clueless on like, the bill or whatever that they're trying to bring into law. But you have like little bullet points, and you also give them that sheet with the bullet points. There's probably a name for that sheet. Is that just like a fact sheet maybe
It's just a
for
fact sheet.
yeah. And so it's, kind of has everything you need to say. You just like articulate it. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because yeah, you don't have to have an encyclopedia brain, as you said, or like, be a particular type of person. I think we associate Capitol Hill with a type of person, but it's like, no, you can show up as you are and have your voice heard, which is so important.
Absolutely. And another way, if you're not in Washington or if you're not in your state capital, you can always send a letter. You can always send an email. And especially for those of us who are introverts, like me, gives me a little bit of time to really think through, what am I going to say in this particular thing? And if I want to really manage how much information I share or how confident I am, that gives me the time to really think through those issues. So you don't have to show up in person. You can show up via email. You can show up via even like a little video that you send. People really appreciate that. There's so many different ways that you can advocate.
I love this. And, let's talk personality types, right? Because as I mentioned, sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I so want to do this. I so want to go clean up the park, right? And then you're like, you realize you are not good at, that's not your skill set, right? And so what have you noticed about personality types and these various ways to serve as a nonprofit volunteer? I mean, the thing that comes to mind to me is, social media is I've always had this thing since I wrote Hip Trinkle Chick in 2006 of hosting a charity, TEA, right? Where you like get together, you bring girlfriends together, boyfriends, I mean, whatever, people, and everyone brings something, maybe like say you're trying to raise awareness for a food bank in your area. Everybody brings a canned food item or $25 or whatever. And then you can have a speaker from that organization come and tell a little bit about it. You can hand out materials, and then you just have like a tea party, right, of sorts, or,
Mhm.
cocktail party, whatever you want. And so, recognizing like if you have connections, that's a really wonderful way. And then, of course, with social media, you can reach people from everywhere, not just people who could come and actually sit in your living
Mhm.
room. So I love that you have this personality type piece. And so, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I loved those charity TEA options that you did. And that also speaks a lot to who you are. So if I could just look at, analyzing that perspective, people who generally like to invite their friends, like to host these events, are typically people who seek social connection through their charitable engagements. And that is one reason why people get involved with charity in the first place, because they're seeking like-minded individuals who might be really passionate about a cause, and they build a sense of community around that. Women in particular seek affiliation through their charitable causes. A lot of my work, as you know, has been in the women's philanthropy space. And what I find more so than men, we want to talk about our charitable endeavors. We want to go to each other's houses. We want to really build that sense of community. So that is one motivator for why people get involved. Another personality type are those people who come into charity seeking power or a sense of agency. And by that, I'm not necessarily talking about somebody who's going to beat their chest or beat their hands on the desk and say, it's got to be my way. But it may be those people who want to feel like they are directing their efforts to create positive change. These are the folks who generally gravitate towards board service. They're the ones who want to create change. They want to create policies. They want to create systemic change. They're the ones who want to be at the center of where things happen and make decisions. So that's another personality type. You've got the people who like the social affiliation, you've got the people who like the power, and then you also have the people who like the recognition. And these people are the ones who generally like to see if you've got a lot of money, you're making a lot of donation, in DC, you walk through GW's campus, you could see the building names, named after people. Those are people who want to see their name in lights. These are the people who might want to have their names on websites, on honor rolls. Also, those are maybe the people who like social media, who like to say, hey, I'm in the know on this type of thing. Come along and check me out. So those are generally the three main drivers of why people get involved with philanthropy. And I'm going to touch on the fourth, because even though a lot of people say, oh, I'm doing it just because it's a good cause, it's the right thing to do. Generally speaking, there's usually an underlying motivator, because when you strip down the core messaging, and we as women, I think, are also socialized to believe, oh, we should say that, this is the right thing. Because if we really say, I really am motivated by power, I'm really motivated by recognition, people are like, oh, that's not what good girls say. But when you strip down the notion of the people who are the idealists, who really are doing it because it's a good cause, they don't want any recognition. They don't even want to thank you. They are just doing it because it's a good thing. They may never see who the beneficiaries are of their service. They just want to know that they got somebody.
I love that. I love that you've broken it out into these different personality types that can help us better understand, okay, what is my personality type, so that I don't sign on to be a board member and then realize like, oh my gosh, that's not me. I want to be out like feeding the animals or, whatever, versus, meeting around a conference table and talking about strategy. And so I really, really like this. And you talk about too, creating your own philanthropic brand, which I love. And so can you tell our listeners, like, how do we do that? How do we create our brand as a philanthropist?
Absolutely. It starts with a very simple question. Why are you involved with a particular cause? A lot of times we get pulled into charity thinking, oh, well, somebody has invited me to do this and I want to do this, or this looks like a good idea. But the first step to articulating your philanthropic brand is to understand, Why are you doing this? Are you particularly passionate around children? Are you particularly passionate around animals? Are you particularly passionate about refugees, from the Ukraine? And really focusing and directing all of your communications, be it your social media, be it the events that you host, be it where you send your money towards that cause. So I'm not saying that you want to spread everything around and you know, talk about all these different things, but it's rather just being focused as to what is your core philanthropic proposition and making sure that you're really creating that sort of lens. So, for example, you have a very clear philanthropic brand. It's about the pugs, it's about the animals, it's about that. You go onto your social website, you even, read your tranquility notes that come through. What's it about? People get that sense from you. And I think that a lot of times people want to be able to identify when they read communications or where they see a particular tweet to see that it's consistent with that person's particular why. You go onto my website, you'll see a lot of stuff on international issues and women. That's where my focus is. So I think that it helps a lot of people to be able to narrow what their focus areas are and create messaging that's central to that. It takes a little bit of time to really figure that out. You've got to try, different kinds of charities, different kinds of activities, but in the long run, you'll ultimately find out what really resonates with you and you'll communicate accordingly.
Yeah. And it's funny, I talk about in the Coterie, which is my annual program, and also in the book, Year of Tranquility, this idea of creating your personal brand, right? And how really what you do choose to donate to, or how you spend your time, of course, things along those lines are so important as we think about brand, but it's also about like where you give to and what are your causes. And, an example was pre-pandemic, I for years hosted yoga and the animals at an animal sanctuary just outside of DC. And someone actually said to me, they were like, that could not be more you, right? That's like
Mhm.
so you. And it just popped in of like, oh, that's my brand, right? And I know brand can have a negative connotation, but as we think about it, really brand is what people think about when they think about you, right? How they think about
Mhm.
you, like when you're not around, right? You like certain colors, etc. So of course we want causes associated with our brand, right? We want people to know what is it that's important to me.
Mhm. But it's also a sense of power too, because if you think about it, all of us are bombarded with all of these different things to get involved with, all these different invitations, all these different solicitations. And if you think about dispersing that attention in so many different directions, you're diluting your brand, but you're also diluting your philanthropic power in that organizations, it's nice to receive a small check, small checks and donations are always welcome. But imagine the impact you could make if you consolidated some of those smaller donations to a cause that really meant something to you. That might be more animals are helped, more children are helped, more women are saved. So I really like to encourage people as they think about this space, rather than giving a little here, a little bit there, a little bit everywhere, to really focus, to really step back and not respond to all the noise that's out there, but come inside and think about what really matters to me and focus those efforts accordingly.
I think that is so, so important. And it's not like, as you say, $25 here, 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 here. Not that that's not important, right? But can you do more if you consistently stand for a particular cause or something is always like really important to you, because then you can share it in your online persona and your in-person persona on social media and your donations, etc. And,
Mhm.
it just makes me think this past week with everything going on in Ukraine, right? The nonprofit Pigs and Pugs Project, we wanted to do something, but we focus on US nonprofits, right? So pig sanctuaries and pug rescues. But we're like, we can't ignore this, obviously. And so through Tranquility du Jour, I did a donation a few weeks ago. And then we were just like, okay, we have to make an exception from our US rule. And so just this week, and we're recording this April, not April, March 18th, right? So just this week, donated to International Found. Gosh, I always get the F mixed up, but I think Federation of Animal Welfare, right? And they have a relationship with some of the shelters, the animal shelters in Ukraine, right? Even the zoos, right? The bears, and I don't know if you read in the post about the elephant and the people that have to come and sleep with the elephants because they're so scared, and God only knows how they're doing now. And so to have an organization that's going in there and not just giving money, but they're going in there and helping. So it's like, okay, we make an exception to the US rule, right? But if you think about it, that's all tied into animals, but also helping with current crises.
And that's your lens, because if you think about it, so even though your mission is specifically US focus, there's still that direct tie to animals. And I think that that's a great way to bridge out. So it makes sense and is consistent from a branding perspective, because clearly with the war going on in Ukraine, all of us want to do something. And there's just so many different places where we can help. By understanding what our core why is, gives us a lens to think about, well, what aspect of this humanitarian crisis can we address? And so if based on your story, it's clearly consistent that that animal piece is being taken care of. And I would also say it's probably a piece that is not being paid much attention to in the media, just given everything that's going on. So the fact that you are focusing on that specifically is not only consistent with your brand, I think it's also focusing on an issue that is really undercovered in the media.
It's so interesting you say that, because I remember the Washington Post article, and listeners, I'll put a link to it. It was earlier this month, maybe 2 weeks ago. And there was an article about the trucker convoy that was coming to DC, right? And you should have seen the comments there. And I rarely read comments, but I was like, this is going to be entertaining. And so was reading that, and there were 3 comments on the Washington Post article about the zoo in Kyiv. And I was just like, wow. And a commenter even said, I can't believe there aren't more comments under this article. And I was like, wow. And again, I mean, I read comments maybe once a year, right? So what are the chances I caught both of those? One with hundreds of comments and one with 3. And it's just so interesting. Yeah. Where are people's, people are really like gung ho about certain things. And yeah, this isn't necessarily getting the coverage. Maybe by the time this podcast releases, it is.
Let's hope so. But I think that just going back and circling back with the whole notion of advocacy too, that what you talked about in terms of the comments is also a form of advocacy, because there are so many causes that are out there that are not getting any attention. So one way that you could serve your cause well is by making sure that you're raising it in different forms, even if it doesn't seem like it's related. It's really important because you can find a way to angle and hook to make sure that that space becomes important. For example, my husband does a lot of volunteer work in the hostage space. And right now, a lot of the cases that he's working are falling under the radar just because of the bigger crisis in Ukraine. But he's constantly making sure that social media, different media outlets are really focused in on the plight of one American in Kiev, one American in Kabul, one American in Venezuela. Because if we decided not to raise our voices on behalf of those people, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it?
No, that's such a good reminder. Yeah, I should have commented, right? You put things in the comments, just different places, right, to bring awareness. I appreciate that. Thank you. And one of the things you talk about in the book, which I also think is amazing, is 12 ways to make a difference when you don't have time. So if you could just share maybe a few of your favorite, because I'm sure a lot of listeners are like, how do I add this into my overflowing calendar and to-dos? And yet it's so, so, so important.
It is. And I think the first thing is educating yourself on what the issues are. So many times we have causes that really mean a lot to us. And if we had time, we would love to volunteer for them. So the easiest thing you can do is find the website of an organization that's working in a mission that's important to you and signing up for their newsletter. Get smart on the issues, because one day you might find that you do have a little bit of time, and that newsletter is going to pop into your inbox and it's going to be the perfect time, and you can volunteer for them. If not, at least you're getting smart on the issues. So I think that that's a very intentional way to get involved and do something when you have limited time. Another way is to be very sensitive to what you consume and what you invest, because there are so many products, there's so many services, there's so many things out there that do have a notion of corporate social responsibility or a notion of doing social good. So even if you're not able to make big, huge donations or volunteer a whole bunch of time, be mindful about the companies that you're buying products from. Are they supporting things? So if you order something from Amazon, are they making a contribution to the good? I don't want to make a judgment one way or the other, but I'm just saying it's a good question to ask. Or is your local bookstore that's actually going out and distributing books to school children making a difference? So do a little bit of research as to where you're buying your goods and services and how much of that is actually going to philanthropy. Another thing is, we're at an age where a lot of us have investments. We're making investments into our retirement plans and 401ks. What kinds of stock are you investing in through that? Are those stocks and companies that you're investing in, are they committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is there good representation of women on their boards? What kinds of policies do they have with regards to where they operate? Do they have a good record on human rights issues where they operate? So it's the notion of being a mindful consumer as you're doing that. And I don't want to scare you in thinking, oh my gosh, I really have to think about it long and hard the next time I go to the Whole Foods and make sure that I'm buying the right cookie. But I think it's when you do have time, really stop and thinking. If you have a choice between buying one product or another, think about, which one is where am I giving good? I mean, that's why I'm a huge fan of example for Burt's Bees in Maine and Tom's of Maine, because they're doing a lot of good for the environment. And if I have a choice between buying that, maybe another product that isn't committed to it, I'm going to pick the one that's really doing a good thing.
Absolutely. Such a great reminder, right? Because we vote with our dollar. And
We
one of the things, just an example, is I have always loved Oreos, double stuffed, preferred. And, so for a while, that would be my little vegan treat, right? Because they're vegan. I mean, because they're completely unnatural. Well, at one point, this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, I realized that they contained palm oil. I don't know if they
Mhm.
do now. I assume they probably do, but I should check because maybe I can have Oreos again. But immediately I cut myself off and I was having a little 6 pack of Oreos that I'd get at, the local 7-Eleven, like, a few times a week. And no,
Yep.
I haven't had another one since. And, it's just like little things because palm oil, if, I think listeners probably are aware, but, they are destroying the forest where the beloved orangutans live. And
Yeah.
that's a problem. And so recognizing like even the ingredients in what you consume can make a difference, right? But as you say, we don't want you to become paralyzed at the grocery store. But if you can become a more educated consumer, just a little bit of Googling. And, there's also the little leaping bunny, right, on products that shows it wasn't tested on animals, just small things, right, that can make a big difference. Because when we do purchase those, we are, showing like, okay, this is something that we want in the marketplace. And I think that that's a big responsibility, for us, an
It is.
opportunity.
And the thing just to also be mindful too is an organization, is a corporation truly committed to a particular social cause, or are they using the social cause to create a positive brand? So for example, if somebody puts, the leaping bunny onto a product, how much of their corporate profits are actually going to that cause? Is it a significant thing that's going to make a difference, or is it pennies on the dollar? So that's one thing to be mindful of. Just because somebody has got a big, United Nations, UN for Women, logo on their website doesn't necessarily mean that they're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's kind of a caveat emptor, buyer beware, and ask a lot of questions and do a little bit of research.
Yes, yes, I love that. Thank you. Good reminders. And
Mhm.
one of the pieces, of course, that's important as a volunteer, or being associated with nonprofits and, in these various capacities, we have to be aware of burnout. And so, what are some ways that you encourage listeners to draw boundaries so that we don't get kind of fully pulled into something that we just realize we can't sustain?
Mhm. I think it's being very intentional and mindful before you go into a certain activity to know exactly what you're getting yourself into. So, for example, if you decide that you're going to volunteer a Saturday a month to, be at the animal shelter, what exactly does that mean? How much time is that taking from your calendar? How much of an impact is that going to have on other people in your household, family members? Does that mean that somebody else is going to have to take the kids to soccer practice? Does that mean that somebody's going to have to go and get food on their own? What kind of impact? Is there a financial impact? So it's one thing to volunteer, but is there also an expectation that all volunteers will bring their own supplies, that will do all of this stuff? It's asking these questions in advance to get a full, complete picture of what is involved with the obligation. The second thing is to enlist an accountability partner. So, someone who is a good friend or family member who can see the signs and tell you, possibly like, it looks like you might be going a little bit too far, or I noticed that you're pouring yourself so much into this issue that it looks like you may not be eating, or all of these other things. Someone who could really point to you with all the love in the world to say, maybe you're going a little bit too much. I think a lot of us who are very committed to certain causes will give and give and give and give, and it's hard for us to recognize. It's hard for us to recognize that we've gone in too far. So having somebody who we love, or who cares about us, say, this is a little bit too much, um, is going to be really important. And then finally, when you do find yourself in that space, it's giving yourself the grace and permission to back off. I think a lot of us who are so committed to causes feel like we're letting people down, that we're disappointing others, and that we're letting ourselves down if we're not doing a whole, we're going to go on to this all the way. And it's important to recognize that we cannot be our best selves to others if we're not taking care of ourselves. So it's being completely honest. When you do realize that you're in that situation, have a conversation with the executive director of an organization saying, your cost still really means a lot to me, but I'm afraid that I'm going to have to pull it back. What might that look like? Can I make it happen? And then once you do, honor yourself and celebrate the fact that you did pull back, because a lot of people will just go into that space and, feel really bad about it. Be grateful that you saw yourself going in too deep, and that you do have the sense of agency and the sense of empowerment to back off a little bit. I think just recognizing and honoring where you are for making a difficult decision or being through a difficult space is really, really important.
Right, right. So important. What's funny, as a nonprofit kind of founder, I remember, so we founded Tringle Space Foundation back in 2006, and we had this amazing group of kind of volunteers and a small board. And I would always get nervous at the beginning of every year because we would have people quitting. And it was just like the beginning of the year. I think people do a lot of reassessing, right? What do I have time for? What do I not? And it was always like, oh, as emails came in at the beginning of the year. I mean, we typically would have like one or two, but it was just like they were key people that I was so sad to lose. So it's funny too, of just recognizing there's somebody on the other side of you being like, I can't do this anymore. But yet we have to value what's important, because nobody wants a volunteer showing up 50%. That's like not in anyone's best interest. But it is funny how like the reevaluating is like, oh, wah, wah.
It's hard. And on that point, too, if we are the recipient of that email, while our heart is breaking, going, oh my gosh, how am I going to be able to do this? The fundraising person quit, and what's happening here? I think that we can also feel empowered to ask the person who's stepping back if they know of anybody that they would recommend to step into that position as well. So this way, the onus isn't entirely on the executive director or the chair of the organization, but that the person who's sitting in those shoes might think about someone in their network who they think could do a good job as well. Because I think that those people still want to continue doing a good thing. It's just not a good fit for them at that moment in time.
Totally. No, such a good reminder.
Mm.
And Diane, before I ask you my very last question, before we started recording, you shared something that I think is so powerful as to how you came up with the idea and the plan for your book. So would you be willing to share? And then I'll ask you my last question.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because, as you know, Kimberly, had been coming to your New Year's Eve retreats and all of these wonderful retreats that you do, particularly for writers, through Tranquil Space. And this book had been in the works for a number of years before I wrote it, before I actually put pen to paper, because I would sit in your retreats, and as you would kind of say, give us like the prompt of, what would you write about if you could? I start thinking about, there's a lot of women who are asking me the same question over and over again about philanthropy. So year after year, I'd start adding to what I was writing into your journals. Into from your retreats, start looking through it. I'm like, it looks like there's a book in here. So maybe to offer you a little bit of a commercial, especially with your New Year's Eve retreats that are now, of course, virtual, thinking you never know where those notes may go. But if you are an aspiring writer, go to the retreats that Kimberly has, because you never know where your next book may come from. So yeah, it's kind of funny how that all works.
I
A
love
lot of
that.
HQ in there too.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so great because if you think about it, a lot of people will write those answers to the questions in a journal and put it away for a while. And then maybe they'll pull it out at the next retreat if they remember where they put it. Or oftentimes I feel like those dreams can just go and, sit on a shelf. And so I love that you were planting seeds that ultimately took shape, right? And even if your dreams don't take shape, there's a lot of power to planting them, but also revisiting them. And you were able to recognize, I see a theme here.
Mhm. Yeah, no, certainly. That certainly is true. So I really thank you for what you did through those retreats. You helped me plant the seed. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm so proud of you. And as you know, as a podcast listener, my
Mhm.
last question is, how do you find tranquility in your everyday? Because you have obviously a lot going on. And how do you infuse it? How do you find it?
Well, I live in a beautiful place. So I live in Maine now. My husband and I moved up here back in 2018. And every morning when I wake up, I look outside and see the water. And what I do, if folks follow me on social media, is I snap photos of the beautiful place where I live season after season, sunrise, sunset, doing all of these great things. So I infuse tranquility every day by living where I love. It's really a blessing to do that, especially in this day and age and in the time of us transitioning from pandemic to endemic. I'm very lucky in that way.
And remind me when you moved to Maine. It's been a bit.
It's been a bit. So my husband and I bought our house up here in 2015.
Okay.
We continue to go back and forth, but we moved up here full time in 2018. So it's hard to believe we've been here for 4 years.
Wow.
Mm.
And I do notice those photos. They're beautiful. And listeners, I'll have a link to her social so you too can see beautiful, beautiful Maine.
Thanks, Kimberly. Mhm.
Well, thank you, Diane. Congrats again on this gorgeous book. So proud of you. It's so clear, concise, encouraging, inspiring. And thank you for telling us how to practically give joyfully. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on your show, Kimberly.